Hi folks, my name is Nathaniel Bennett Monroe, and I'm a graduate and current student of Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont. As a student of Goddard College, it's important for you to show your work at the end of a senior study that every bachelor student has to do. This study honestly could be almost about anything. It needs to involve some research, needs to involve a real dedication to a specific subject. And when trying to think of different ideas of things that I could study for that semester, which I suppose now is 2 semesters ago, I couldn't shake the idea of kind of living 2 lives, focusing so heavily on schoolwork when it was time, and then at the other hand, every other aspect of my life having to do with the building of this house. So the more I thought about it, I wanted to incorporate the building of this stone cottage in some way in my senior study. I wasn't sure how, but it was during one of the nights at the residency of that year. A group of us were talking about different ideas and all sorts of things involving education, as we do, and we got into a conversation about the moments in life that we felt like we enjoyed learning the most. This sort of conversation often led to an experience where the student, whoever was speaking at the time, most felt connected to what they were learning about. Either it opened their eyes to something that they didn't know they already had an interest about, or, which was the most common thing, they already had an interest, at least some part of an interest, in the topic at hand. And from that topic, they were able to expand on it. They felt like it related to them in a way that was meaningful. And they were able to dive into learning of this specific topic so fully that they didn't even think about themselves as learning. It just happened. For me, if you can get there, right? If you can get there, that's the ideal. As a teacher, you'd love your students to be able to have that deep connection to what they're learning about. And of course, different schools require different things for students to learn about. And as a secondary social studies licensure candidate, I'm thinking about social studies. So this idea kind of came off in my mind about what I would do for my project. I started thinking about how maybe I could combine this, which was my own fascination and obsession at the time. Maybe I could combine this with this sort of idea that I have about trying to, this idea popped up of teaching history backwards. Maybe taking an interest, even if it's uninvolved at this point, to what I want to teach as a teacher at the moment. Taking this interest of students, this maybe obsession that they have with a certain topic, or at least just a light interest, and working backwards, expanding on it. Thinking of social studies as a broad umbrella of different ways to understand humans and people. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could take this project of mine, this obsession of mine that consumes my every thought, and expand on it, to go much further, and to seek out different aspects that would be kind of under the social studies umbrella, and expand on this project, and hopefully end up with a stronger and deeper understanding and connection and experience as a whole than I otherwise would have. So there it is, the crux of my senior study. Something of a research paper, something of a long journal entry. I decided to start each chapter of my tale with a story of sorts to kind of set the scene. Each chapter focuses on certain topics of study, like geology, history, and economics. I met with former teachers and spoke with them. I talked to different builders and contractors in the area and people that I've worked with. I talked to stonemasons. I went to my neighbor's place and listened to their stories about the surrounding area and this property before we bought it. So, if I'm able just to quote a little bit from what I wrote in my senior study in my introduction. I wrote, In the end, my dream to build a stone cottage became more meaningful and deepened my understanding of this process and connection to the place of which I was to build my future home. Building this home was always a lot, but it became so much more through this project. It became an important life lesson for me, not only as a builder, not only as a future educator, but as a person. To never push aside the things in this world that excite you and amaze you, and to always strive for deepening your understanding and opening doors that could lead you to places you never imagined you would go. So, if you'll come with me for just a little bit of your time, I'm going to introduce you to a few different aspects and a few different portions of the chapters which I wrote about. Take you to some of the surrounding places, take you around the property a bit, talk about rocks, talk about history, talk about economics, and yeah, that's pretty much my plan. So, if you'll come with me, let's go explore Waldoboro. For this first chapter, I decided to call it Point of Inquiry. The main idea behind this was thinking about the topic, the sort of obsession or interest that I had, right, to start this. So before expanding on all these topics, you have to figure out what you're interested in first to begin with. The kind of way that you're going to be able to thread all these different ideas together, it needs to follow that same path. Back to that thing that you want to know more about. For me, it's stonework. For this project, it's stonework. But with myself kind of being the guinea pig for this project, I started to think about, why is that? Why am I so obsessed with building a stone house? Why is that something that I've decided to do? It's certainly not the easiest thing to do. It certainly just takes a lot of work and a lot of labor. So why? And this idea of kind of this point of inquiry and thinking about how it would apply to a public school setting, I thought about how it might work in that sort of environment. I thought about maybe perhaps we could pool a bunch of ideas, sort of nominate them in the classroom, and to sort of democratize the classroom and take my own voice out of this decision-making process as the teacher in the room. Students could vote, perhaps even rank choice vote, something that we do here in Maine, for their topic of study, their interest, and maybe we get something close to a consensus. So I started thinking about my own point of inquiry, and decided in this chapter when I started writing to write about the where it all began for me, for right at the very start of my schooling, and kind of when I started to realize who I was as a learner, the ways that I felt like I best learned and took in new information. It certainly wasn't through those kind of classic academic styles, things like reading and mathematics. I struggled to learn how to read heavily, and mathematics I still struggle with today. But I use them. I use them in the building of my house. So it's amazing to kind of start seeing these different things that you've learned in your past to be applicable, but that's something else. So for me, when I started thinking about that I learned through doing things with my hands, and building was a huge part of that. I went to the school around us, a small, democratically run private school in Arundel, Maine, that focused much of its philosophy on the teachings of John Dewey. So I went there for 10 years of my life. My mom worked there, my sister went there, and we had a lot of time outdoors to do things. And in that time outdoors, I was building forts constantly. All my friends and I, we built the most wild and crazy forts that you could imagine. I mean, my favorite one ever, right? My favorite one ever was this kind of tarp we built out of pallets. This structure and this tarp that went over it, so it was fine from the rain. And we had this kind of wrestling mat that we found, and we got that inside of it. So you had this cushy, comfortable floor, and then this huge, massive, bigger than this whole structure right here, tractor tire. We had this tractor tire, and obviously there was no rim in it or anything like that, so it was hollow in the middle. And we set that as the door. It was very poorly built. The nails sticking out everywhere. It eventually got shut down because a prospective student on a tour stepped on a nail there and didn't end up coming to the school. So the fort did get shut down. But we used to run from across the field and just run as fast as we could and dive through the tire onto the mat and roll onto the mat. We thought it was the coolest thing ever. That's kind of where building started for me. And at home, I built a tree fort, and working with my hands, was something that made sense to me. It was a way that I kind of experienced the world. And as time went on, my fiance and I, Sarah, we after high school, we decided to travel across country and work on farms through this program called WOOF, which is Willing Workers on Organic Farms. And I did a lot of building there, and we had this dream to farm. And we always, ever since we were in high school together, we dreamed about building a house. That was so important to us. So it was constantly everywhere we went, every city, every different state, every farm that we worked on. It was kind of pulling different ideas and bringing them into this house that we're going to build. And through our time going across country, we some people who were building their own home gave us books, and we were inspired, and we knew by the end of it we wanted to build a cob house. Cob is essentially earth, clay and sand and straw. This kind of ancient way of building that felt so hands-on, so accessible and real to us, and that was it. We knew what we wanted. Our thatched roof, reed thatched roof. We knew the aesthetic that we wanted, and we went to, we have family friends in England, and we went to England and decided, and we spent time there, and then decided to go to Ireland, spent time traveling, backpacking around Ireland and hitchhiking our way there, and completely inspired by that travel. It was tough, but it was amazing and beautiful, and the homes there, just the way that they were constructed out of stone and cob, and they had been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, multi-generational homes, and that was so interesting to us. So as we came back, we decided that we wanted to save up money for property. That was something we wanted since high school. We're going to do this. We're going to save money. And in doing so, we decided to build a tiny house. And, actually, let me back up a bit. We decided to renovate a camper. Thought it would be the cheapest option. Cheap was the name of the game for this project. Cheaper the better. So we got to work. We bought a camper, and it was already stripped. Everything out of the camper shell was completely gone. So we were like, yes, this is perfect. We can just, very small camper too, single axle trailer, very small. Got it for nothing. And as we're driving it back on the highway, not realizing that it's just essentially this big tinfoil structure. Really, it has no all of the furniture and all the different components inside. That was the structural strength of the trailer. So it just crumpled on the highway, and we were devastated. And we got home, and Sarah's father, was kind of like, "Why don't you build one of those cool tiny houses?" And so we thought about it a little bit more, and we were like, I think we could do that. But again, the rule was as cheap as humanly possible. So I got to work on scavenging everything I could find. I found insulation. We insulated with hair. Okay, Sarah worked at a dye house, and they spun their own yarn there as well. And they'd have all these little bits that would be on the floor, and they'd sweep it up and bale it and throw it away after that. So we took it and we insulated our home with buffalo hair. And I built, the whole structure of the house is pallets. The furniture's pallets. The framing is pallets. The floor is pallets. every single thing I could scavenge, I did it, and the house certainly is not beautiful, but functional. We lived there for 5 years now, so that was a huge learning process for me. I'd grown up never having the right tools. My dad's not a builder. He's many things, many excellent things. Building is not his thing. So I had like a bent little tiny hammer to use, and never had a saw. So just breaking things, and that's always been just make do, right? So from there, we saved up money, saved up, and I'll cut this short. I won't give the full life story here, but getting here to this property was a process that almost didn't happen, and it was a little bit above our price range. I worked as a mushroom delivery driver, and Sarah as working in the dye house or as a nanny. We made barely any money. We saved every single penny we possibly could living in this tiny house, and we over years we just to get that down payment, right? We knew it would be a heavy down payment, so yeah. At the final hour, when we wanted to make an offer, which was going to be below the asking price, we heard that there were already other people who had made offers by the realtor, and so we were devastated. And I made this plea to the realtor. I sent this long letter about what we wished to do here and the kind of life we wanted to live. That I wanted to be a teacher in this town. That we wanted to be a part of the community. And she definitely took a liking to us, and she lobbied for us. And in the end, they accepted our offer, even though it was below the other offers and below the asking price. Incredible. A dream. So, yeah, truly blessed in that way. But then it was, off to the races to build here, and that's where that project started. So, and through that time, we also traveled, to Canada, to Cape Breton, Canada, Nova Scotia, and we also went to Scotland, which was like the trip of our lifetime. We went with a friend of ours, and that was when our interest shifted from a cob home to a stone home. The places we stayed on the Hebrides, out in the Hebrides, the islands there, worked on a farm, and just the history, the connection. I have, both of us have, heritage from Scotland, but something about being in Scotland, something about this trip, it all came together. And it was an incredible experience, and seeing the homes there and the sort of pieces that were left behind from people when they were cleared out of there, from Cromwell, it sparked my interest in history. It sparked my interest in stone, and that's where we are today. This is my point of inquiry. Believe it or not, I go into even more depth in the chapter, but I'll leave it there. That was a little more than I want to. So let's move on to chapter 2. Yeah. There's an old farming adage in Maine where one farmer asks the other, "What are you growing?" The other farmer answers, "Rocks." Maine is known for its rocky soils, and in this chapter, I decided to focus on geology. Yes, it's not something that's really commonly covered in social studies, but I decided to let this kind of process lead me wherever it was going to. And geology seemed to make a lot of sense as I was working with stone. I wanted to know more about stones. I wanted to know more about how they were formed, where they came from, and what made up the different sort of aesthetic and structural properties of stones in this area. In this chapter, I covered things like the process of picking stones, finding them, and collecting them. I also decided to focus on the formation of rocks, and also rocks and its like the process of quarrying and its connection to Waldoboro and the surrounding area here in Lincoln County. This right here is solid bedrock, or ledge is another term for it. It played a huge role in the construction of our home. with a stone house, you could imagine the excessive amount of weight that is going to be bearing down on the earth. And in most homes, a stick-built house, you're not going to really have to worry much about that. The weight would not be anything comparable to a stone house. So you have your footing, which is essentially like a big snowshoe that goes down deep into the soil. And that is wider than the actual wall that is formed. Most homes in the Northeast have a basement because you have to dig so low anyway, just to get down below the frost line so you don't have heaving when the winter comes. So, that footing goes down, and for a stone house, on poor soil such as we have here, they are not well drained and they're very clay-based soils. You would need a foot so wide and so thick that the cost of doing a basement would be exorbitantly expensive. And for us, it was already very expensive just because it had to be 14 inches thick when you normally have in a stick-built house 8-inch thick wall. But anyway, so when you're down there, we lucked out, okay, with our soils so poor and having to calculate the size of the footing and all that concern about settling and cracking and fissures in our foundation and in our stonework, we ended up hitting solid ledge, solid bedrock, deep down in the ground. And we were able to build our house directly on that bedrock, essentially giving us unlimited strength to be able to carry the weight of our house. I'm incredibly thankful for that. But that process involved a lot of research, and I learned a few things about bedrock in that process. For instance, bedrock is formed through the sedimentation of many different rocks coming together, crushing together over time, and moving down into this solid mass here with the forces and the heat, gravity pushing down on it around the Earth, essentially forming the Earth's crust. In some places it's 40 miles deep, that thick of a sheet of solid rock. Incredible, right? In Maine, according to the Department of Agriculture, in Maine, the oldest known section of bedrock is 647 million years old. How fascinating is that? This is granite right here. Maine is very much known for it. I'm going to take you to the Waldoboro Quarry, where I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And granite makes up about 90% of the rocks that were used in our house. It's a very plentiful rock. It's beautiful with the quartz that it shows, but also has some other properties that should be considered. Okay, building on solid bedrock may be good for the amount of weight that it can handle, but I soon found out that granite also puts off a toxic radiation called radon that fills a lot of basements, fills a lot of homes, and is toxic over time for people to breathe. With homes and how well they're insulated now, you don't have those cracks in homes where air flows in and out of the house very easily. You have these tight, well-insulated homes where it traps air in the winter when you don't have your windows open. So radon gas is a problem. Thankfully, we learned about this ahead of time, and we were able to put in piping, so we're able to take the radon right out from the basement once we capped it over. But without further ado, let's go explore a few other aspects of geology that I covered in this chapter of my writing. So, this here is the Waldoboro Quarry, obviously no longer up and running, but at one point was, and was a big source of income for a lot of people who lived here in the early to mid 1900s. One interesting thing about this quarry that I found out relatively recently is that huge slabs of granite that were cut out of this quarry right here went all the way out to Buffalo, New York in the early 1900s to make the Buffalo Savings Bank, I believe. The reason why that's interesting is because it draws a connection to Waldoboro and Buffalo, New York. And Buffalo, New York is where my mother's side of the family is all from. a place that I've gone many, 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 many times to visit family over the years. So, an interesting thing that I found through researching. The process of picking all of these stones was sort of ridiculous, but this property itself, which is not ideal, doesn't have a lot of stones. Like I said, it's mostly clay soil. It's not very sandy, not very rocky. So, just about every stone, not every stone, we did have a pile that came up from the ground, I went out and picked by hand. That's a process that took years. It didn't have to, but we knew that we wanted to build a stone house ahead of time. And I worked for a mushroom company delivering mushrooms all over Maine. So this allowed me access to different piles everywhere, all up and down Maine. So you have stones like this just from an abandoned quarry locally. This is granite. So you have stones like this that I was able to pick. You have stones like this. I don't know if you can see, but it's a pink granite. And this is specifically from Mount Desert Island, where Bar Harbor is, or Acadia National Park. I delivered up there as well. So once I was done with my delivery, I still had the delivery van to bring back this direction. And I'd pick for a few hours at the end of, a few days a week. Almost every day though, towards the end. And I'd come to this property as soon as we bought it, and we didn't even have a road here, so I'd just, dump them out into a pile, and we'd move them again and again. So I have some numbers here on the stone collection, but before I do that, so picking stones, for me it was aesthetic, right? It was the beauty of each rock, and there was something special about each location that these came from. It's funny, as I go to put them in the wall now, I see them and I can remember that exact moment when I picked up this rock. Maybe it was near Bar Harbor, or it was it was in some big drainage ditch down near Logan Airport or something like that in Massachusetts. I didn't do that often. But you know what I mean. Or in the woods behind an abandoned, not an abandoned, but like for instance, there's this place in Biddeford where there used to be a bunch of farm property. And in that space, they decided to put a big strip mall in there. There was a lot of pushback, but they ended up buying up all the land and putting a strip mall in there. And behind the one of the stores there, Michael's, a Michael's, behind a gate is this old stone wall that's completely forgotten. And I made a rule not to take from stone walls. I'm pretty sure it's federally illegal to do so, for one. And two, you think about the people who put those stones there all that time ago. I think it's an interesting kind of connection to the past, and leaving those behind in the exact place where they were before, I think is the right thing to do, personally. But this one was, obviously it had been hit with the bulldozer and piled up into a big pile in the back. No longer the rock wall that was there, and I thought, hey, maybe I could do something beautiful with it. So a bunch of stones came from there as well. So I'd sneak the van behind there and make a big pile, then bring the van back around, throw them all in there and get out of there. Not a fun process all the time, kind of stressful, but in the end, we're getting there. So here's some numbers that I actually calculated from my writing. So in general, stones weigh about 175 pounds per cubic foot. So just making some calculations based on that, I can pretty much estimate that I lifted about 450,000 pounds of stones just to get them here. So that's like 225 tons of stones just to get them to the property. That's that first collection. But when you bring into the calculation, you know how people say for firewood, right? It warms you twice. You chop it, you cut it down, you're doing all that, you're chopping it up, and then you put it in there, and then you burn it that winter. It warms you twice. Well, stonework warms you a dozen times over or more. And it starts to get kind of ridiculous. So you think about, in that pile, I've then taken it from these piles that I had down by the edge of the road, and we're way out here now, after we built this road, away from away from Gross Neck Road where we live. So we took those piles and put them back in the truck. We brought them over here, and then put them into smaller piles where we sectioned them out by type and general size. So by the time you move them all these different times before they even go into the wall, and then eventually get moved up there into piles or near the house in piles, and then go into the wall, I think you can estimate that I probably lifted 675 tons of stones, which is over 1,100,000 pounds, right? So that's like the equivalent of 4.8 whales, humpback whales. That's nuts. But anyway, get all the more stronger for it. And honestly, if you pick small stones, it's a lot over time. It's not like I had to lift them all at once. But small stones, they're accessible for anybody. Some of the larger stones, I don't even know how I got them. Getting them in the wall was a lot. And some stones, like the one that I'm sitting on currently, I couldn't even get in the wall because it was so big. So that's picking in a nutshell. I go into more in my writing, but yeah, let's stop it. This has to be my favorite historical site in Waldoboro. It just so happens to be made of stone. It wasn't though originally. In 1785, this town pound was actually created out of wood. And later on, in 1819, about 200 years ago, it was created out of stone like this. And what's so cool about this site, I mean, there's a couple cool aspects to this site, but one is that it's still standing today. So it's a reminder of the past. I mean, animals would get out from local farms, and this would be where they were rounded up and placed for their owners to come and find them. Really cool, and it's still here today, which is a great reminder of the past, but also just a monument to the skill and incredible labor that it took to build such a thing. I don't even know, some of these stones are 9 feet long and must weigh so much, and I can't even imagine how this was even created. The stones that we put in my house, I mean, I've had some stones like this that I sat in the wall, but like, I couldn't imagine. Could not imagine. Crowbars, I don't know, pulleys, I have no idea, but it's incredible, beautiful piece of history that's still here in Waldoboro today. And there happens to be blueberries here, which is pretty cool too.
How they should act. And the question is,
behind me here is the Madomic River, an incredible, life-sustaining body of water that flows 40 miles from the northern town of Liberty all the way down out into the ocean and through Hockomock Channel into Muscongas Bay and out into Broad Bay and eventually out into the Gulf of Maine and the Atlantic Ocean from there. When I was researching for history, it was very easy to find information about the colonial past here in Waldoboro. Definitely an interesting story, but not one that I decided to focus on. Yes, Waldoboro has a storied past of German immigrants coming here to fulfill the Waldo patent, hence the name Waldoboro, and also construction of ships that were very, very important to locations in Boston, like the five-masted schooner that was created here in the 19th century. So interesting things to be found, definitely within those stories. I even found stories of the Gross family that owned Gross Neck Road, it's known today, where I live today, and was able to find some of their important stories about living there and farming there at the local library in a genealogy booklet that was on the Gross family. It was really fun to read, but not what I decided to focus on. I decided to focus on this river in particular. Um, through my research, it was very hard for me to find the stories and experiences of Native American peoples who lived here far before the German immigrants came to this location. It was hard to find that information, but I did the best that I could because for me, it was more important to find a more broad scope of the understanding of this place. I wanted to have a more well-rounded understanding of this river. And so I decided to focus my history not on the colonial experience, not on a very not well researched or well done representation of the Native American experience here along this river. I didn't want to do that because I wanted to do the best that I could um, to do a well-rounded history that was well researched and well done. So I focused on the river and tried to pull everything that I could from it. I went down a couple different rabbit holes in my research thinking about the different place names in the area. For instance, the fact that Waldoboro, named after General Waldo, who owned the land patent here. Why, given the importance of this river, that this river, the name wasn't changed from Madomic, which means place of many alewives, to the Waldo River, or the fact that it flows out into the Hockomock Channel and goes through Muscungus Bay. Those sorts of place names I thought were really interesting. Why was it that in this area, other towns like Pemaquid or Damerscotta that are close by, why was it that those names weren't changed? Why was it that those weren't anglified and that some of the other names were? So I kind of went down that rabbit hole and found some interesting information. I found some interesting information about the Madomic River, the fact that there are shell bins that are here under the surface today, but used to be up to 40 feet high. These shell bins, these debris and collection of, I guess, a rubbish of sorts, bones and shells that native peoples had piled into this portion of the river. And there were a lot of interesting artifacts in there, really interesting things that could tell us more about that time period and people who lived here. But unfortunately, that shell bin was mined by a Massachusetts company that was a chicken feed company, and it was mined and turned to chicken feed to make really strong shells, which is super unfortunate in the 1900s. But many different things came up like that. So this river is amazing. It's fascinating. And today still has a very, very important place in the experience of people who live here today. Many, many people on the road that I live on and in the surrounding area make their living off of this river, and obviously the ocean where it flows into. The mudflats here is the most prolific clamming location in all of Maine. And many people that I know clam there. So, including people who clam right off of the area where we live as well. So, that was my focus for my chapter on history, was on the river itself. And it was really, really enjoyable for me. A great experience. I learned a lot. And, yeah. So, Madomic River. For the chapter that I wrote on economics, I decided to focus mostly on the construction of my house, which didn't get very far in the first year. Mostly consisted of just putting in a long driveway from the road out to the house site and building the foundation for the home. But through the process of researching economics, reading a few books, and learning more about different economic theory and terms, I started to see my experience in that first year through a different lens, which was pretty interesting. I suppose I had made the assumption originally that economics was pretty boring and maybe more mathematic than personal and tangible. But that's not the case. It's a way to view the exchange of goods between people and resources. And for me, looking back at this experience in that way was fascinating. One example is in that first year, in building the driveway and putting in the foundation, there was a lot of heavy machinery used, a lot of big machines and contractors to work them. I had made the assumption that a lot of it was way beyond what I could handle, so I hired it out, and it came at a cost, obviously. So when thinking about the resources that one person has or the capital that one person has, which for us in terms of finances isn't very much, but in terms of willingness for the expense of labor, it's quite high, right? So when looking back on that first summer, I really wish, I guess this is my biggest regret about building so far, I wish that I expended more of my labor and less of my money in that first year. I think it's something that I could have done. And not only is that expensive labor, it's a lot of work, sure, and you are expending, but also there's this learning process that comes with it. So when thinking about weighing those two resources for myself and my partner, it was interesting to see kind of where I came down on that after that first year. So economics became real and interesting and fascinating to me, and perhaps something that I'd actually really like to teach, which I felt like that was kind of maybe the weak link in becoming a social studies teacher. Like, if I had to teach economics, maybe that wouldn't be my thing. But no. Economics can relate to just about anything, and that's exciting to me. Outside of that, in this chapter, I decided to also focus on socioeconomics and thinking about this road that I live on. I had talked to a lot of neighbors and heard their stories and shared some of them and some experiences that I had with them. Folks who have been here for a lot longer than we have. This is a pretty interesting and storied road and well known in the surrounding area. So I also got into that and kind of the lives that they live, the jobs that they do, and things of that nature. So kind of those two aspects are what I decided to focus on, and I'll leave it at that, I suppose. I did write a lot more in the chapter, but yeah, that's economics for you. With this being sort of a weird project, the literature review is also kind of strange. It's not so much scholarly articles, but more kind of just different books, different authors that really inspired me in the process of starting to construct my home, dreaming about my home, but also thinking about teaching as well, and kind of the philosophies that are backing where I'm coming from in my own philosophy as I get ready to teach. So it's kind of balancing, walking that line of how-to books on building stones, books that kind of encompass the life that I want to live, and then teachers that are a great influence for me when it comes to teaching as well. And if there's a way to weave that all together, I tried my best to do that in my writing. So, got a couple books here. This is the Cobb Builder's Handbook, and it's written by Becky B. this was the first book that that sort of got our mind going with building our own house, and feeling like that we could do it ourselves. That was big for us, just we wanted a very specific home, but all those homes are in Scotland or Ireland. So this was kind of that first little bit that gave us the opportunity to dream about doing this ourselves, and it was gifted to us on our road trip across country when we worked on one of the farms that we worked on. And it's just an incredible book. It goes. Becky B does just a great job. There are awesome illustrations of doing every little thing in terms of building a house, and it's all just so feels so doable and possible. And that was so incredible about this book. This was everything to us when we were dreaming about building our own home, and just after high school and until now. So yeah, great book. I recommend it. So from there, we started to think about building a stone house, and we were talking to our friends about it. And a friend of mine, John, on his own road trip, came across this book in a little used bookshop. And it's called "Build Your Own Stone House Using the Easy Slip Form Method" by Carl and Sue Schwanecki. This became our handbook, really, for building this house. When it went into planning and the method that we would use to construct the house, this was the start of it all. A lot of the plans for the foundation and for things like that all came from here in the planning that they did. Where there aren't a ton of pictures in this book, but they do a great job of kind of discussing the process of building a stone house in an easy method, but also bringing in, the one of the writers being an engineer, bringing in kind of a lot of the other aspects of why things work the way they work, why you want to reinforce this, why you don't need to do this, why you want the stones to stack this way. All this sort of this important information for building a stone house. And from there comes a lot of stone books, right? So you start to know what you want to do, and from there you can get more specific. So then we purchased this ourselves, which is called Stone House, A Guide to Self-Building with Slip Forms by Tom Stanley. This book has pictures, which, being a visual learner, very important. You can kind of see the stonework. It looks sort of similar to what we tried to do. His method, this method, a little on the sloppy side, and some of ours is sloppy too, even through our best efforts. But this one, the aesthetic was important to him, and the method, he kind of created a different way to do the forms, and so from there and a different way of keeping some of the mortar and concrete from oozing on the rocks and things like that. You're able to kind of bring in. And they did just the two of them, and as well. And it seems like most of these, it was two people who did it, so that felt accessible to us, as well as builders and figuring out. And this goes into a lot of information about rocks and a lot of information about what concrete is and what cement is and aggregate and sand and all those other aspects of building. So good stuff. Then comes another stone book, Living Homes. Stone masonry, log, and straw bale construction. Building Your High-Efficiency Dream Home on a Shoestring Budget by Thomas J. L. Pell. He has some stuff online as well. He has some videos of building slipform. This became the very specific method that we used. His method, in the end, his description, it was just get to the point. This is how you do it. And it kind of eased a lot of my stress, where some of the other books were very specific, and this eased some of my stress just to dip my toes in the water and just do it, So this is the book that I most referenced throughout the process of building, even though these got me more in the place of planning for the building of the house. This was, if you're going to have a book for building a stone house, it's this one right here. And thinking about kind of the systems in your house afterwards as well. So moving on from there is The Forgotten Arts and Crafts by John Seymour. John Seymour is an incredible writer, a prolific writer. He's written many, many books, but this one is about recapture the self-sufficient life of a bygone age with John Seymour's inspirational record of traditional arts and household crafts, from building a log cabin to baking bread. Basketry, beekeeping, blacksmithing, boat building, laying hedge, lace making, painting, paper making, soap making, spinning, tanning, thatching. It goes on and on and on. But these are the kind of skills and things that obviously people used to learn over years and years and years. But things that I want to learn, things that I want to be a part of my life. I can't stand the kind of culture that we live in where we buy things that break and don't know how to make things ourselves. So for both of us in thinking about our home and the way we want to live our life, John Seymour is an incredible inspiration, and I recommend any of his books. The last one I want to talk about is a book called Craft by Alexander Langlands. Sarah and I love this show. It's this BBC show called the Historical Farm Series, and it's these kind of three historians and archaeologists that go and live life on Victorian farms or Edwardian farms or farms in the Tudor times or just all sorts of different time periods for kind of common people on farms and what their lives are like. So they try to talk about the experiences of the day, but also do the things. And it's an incredible series, and one of the presenters is Alexander Langlands, who wrote this book, Craft, an inquiry into the origins and true meaning of traditional crafts. He's an incredible writer, and if nothing else, his style of writing inspires me so much. You know, it's so descriptive, it's so informational. He tells a story, but also sprinkles in bits of lore and but also like real applicable information about these crafts, these things that the way that people live their lives and would build things and fix things and things like that. So, incredible book. I recommend that for anybody too. So, in addition to the stone building books, would also be A People's History and You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train by Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn's emphasis on the tales that have been specifically filtered out from our conversation about the United States. That emphasis on those stories is, I want that to be the bread and butter of my teaching. I want that to be how I teach history. It seems completely irresponsible to teach it in any other way. So together, in combination with that, in combination with these stone books and some of the books that are kind of the inspiration for the lifestyle that I want to live, that's sort of my literature review in a nutshell. Though there's more in my writing. So there you have it, folks. That's my senior project for you. I asked myself at the end of my writing for this senior study, I wrote, could this work in a social studies context? Could the core values of social studies be applied to any interest? Could this open a door for social studies to become more accessible to students, more meaningful and useful? These are important questions as I come to my conclusion here. And honestly, I don't necessarily have the answers to that. I've yet to be in a school. I've yet to become a teacher. But this is the sort of learning that I intend to foster. I think everybody deserves to be able to pursue their interests, to get the skills in school to be able to pursue their interests when they're outside of the confines of the classroom. For me, my obsession was building this stone cottage. It was for many reasons. For others, it might be anything else. And to have that value, to have that interest and passion for something be fostered and not pushed aside, to have the focus become specifically what the school wants or the teacher wants for students to learn, thinking that that's the most important thing. We all have interests, and it is my hope that perhaps those interests could be pursued through social studies in a way that does make it more useful and meaningful as a topic to people. That's my hope anyway. So, from this point on, I'll continue to build this cottage, to live in it, to teach social studies in the future and come home to it in the end. This will be a part of my life for the rest of my life. With each step of the way, I've learned something new. And through this project, I've been able to grow and dig deeper and go further than I would have done on my own. I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunity that Goddard allowed me to do this. And what I've taken from this will be with me for the rest of my life. I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you do have any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer any of them. This certainly wasn't a how-to on how to build a stone cottage. That wasn't what I did for my project. But if those are the sorts of questions that you have as well, I'd be happy to talk your ear off on them. So thank you, Goddard, for everything. Thank you all to who watched this long video. And may you all pursue your passions, no matter how crazy, no matter how silly, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how heavy they are. You might just be able to complete them, but we'll see.